a flash of light, then two more appeared. A man stood in this strange, boundless space. Behind his body, the brightest flash lingered. This place teeming with countless monsters and constellations was known as the Abyss. A creature resembling a hydra emerged, jaws wide open, trailing after him. The man kept falling, crashing into the beast known as the fierce seven-headed dragon, a monster of immense magical power. Enraged, the dragon opened its mouth, preparing to strike. The man braced himself, diving into position. Suddenly, he unclenched his fist and unleashed a flurry of blows at high speed. An epic battle raged across the sky. Behind him, he sensed another threat, Vulcan, the planet-eater bear approaching fast. The man spread his arms wide, ready to face two rulers of the abyss at once. Then, another presence appeared. Thin-limbed and sinister, a creature crept closer. Both Org and Vulcan were soon ensnared in red threads. Encounters with them together were rare, but rarer still was the sudden arrival of a new foe. A monstrous arachnid, the ruler of the spatial cave, emerged and immobilized the boy. Fear clenched his teeth as the creature hissed, baring its fangs. His eyes flashed defiantly. Lowering his hands, he realized centuries had passed. It felt as though more than 300 years had slipped away. Staring into the endless void, he thought it would be easier to defeat these beasts one by one. Their corpses now lay before him, but he knew he had lost precious time. Resolute, he decided he must find a way back to Earth as quickly as possible. A glimmer of light caught his gaze, and with it came a system notification. He had achieved a feat worthy of the title Invincible Training Master. The world resonated with his very presence, and his existence grew more tangible. The system declared he had become stronger than even a constellation. One day, a portal to the abyss had opened on Earth, and humanity learned the truth. Mythology was not mere imagination. Beings, often winged, known as constellations, were the closest things humans had to deities. They blessed followers and sought to expand their domains. Their eyes glowed brightly whenever their authority grew, their power dependent on their worshippers. These beings clashed, competing for Earth itself, a world with nearly 10 billion potential believers, a prize like no other. The darker, more monstrous constellations sought conquest not through blessings, but with sheer force. And then, one man, or rather, one constellation appeared to oppose them. He steadied himself, catching his breath. His name was Kai. With a serious expression, Kai picked up a frying pan, tossing meat onto its surface. This man carried the title of Invincible Training Master. As he returned the dish to the fire, someone politely asked what kind of pan it was. Smiling, Kai replied that it was forged of adamantine. A nearby goblin, however, was astonished. Could such a pan truly cook the flesh of a planet-eater bear? Even constellations themselves hesitated before such a beast. Pointing at the sizzling meat, the green-skinned figure asked about the oil used. This was no ordinary goblin. It was Max, ruler of the Goblin Kingdom of Ephesus, a great wizard, and a loyal follower of the Invincible Training Master. Kai touched the meat and recalled a certain constellation shaped like a cow, one he had once released in exchange for milk. With a wistful look, he admitted that he longed for ordinary food back then. The goblin was shocked his master had fought a constellation. Kai remembered the battle vividly, but explained that his top priority had always been collecting ingredients. Cooking had been his passion throughout the tens of thousands of years he had endured within the abyss. With his orichalcum kitchen utensils, treasures capable of refreshing ingredients on contact, he sliced butter into the pan. He explained that this was an incredibly rare ingredient, yet after 3 centuries without meat, he thought it only fair to indulge himself. Max trembled with sweat as the truth sank in his master had defeated a constellation. And yet, instead of seizing territory, he had simply taken its milk. The man placed a piece of meat into his mouth and instantly realized it had been cooked to absolute perfection. Nearby, the goblin watched in awe, convinced more than ever that his master was unlike any of the other constellations. Kai smiled warmly and declared that it was time to eat. The wizard, however, hesitated, doubting whether he was truly allowed to taste something so precious. Still, he expressed his gratitude for the opportunity. The goblin picked up a piece with his fork and placed it in his mouth. In that moment, his pupils shimmered, and beams of light burst from his mouth and eyes in all directions. The system confirmed that he had consumed a steak from a constellation. Suddenly, flames formed in the goblin's hand. The system explained that the adamantium within the meat had preserved its umami through magical power. Waves of energy radiated from the wizard, and the system added that, thanks to the mystical constellation's oil, the meat had ascended to an even higher level. This surge of power activated Max's magic circle and unlocked a new one altogether. The great wizard nearly lost consciousness, but instead began to laugh uncontrollably, declaring it the finest dish he had ever tasted. Kai, taking a step back, struggled to understand what was happening with the goblin and quietly admitted that he truly could not comprehend this strange race. Sitting down on the rocks, Kai gazed up at the dazzling night sky. With a sigh, he confessed that he missed Earth. Far away, on Earth, someone strained under a bench press thousands of years ago measured by the passage of time in the abyss. Beneath the barbell, Kai himself struggled as a middle-aged man stood nearby with a textbook in hand. With a frown, the man asked why Kai was lifting weights. Kai answered simply, because he wanted to grow stronger. The man grimaced, placing his free hand on his hip, and clarified that he had meant the Korean lesson in front of him. Another teacher spoke up, urging him to leave the boy alone, as the others had done before. This was the era when Kai was still an ordinary person long before he became a constellation, the invincible training master. The young boy would spend every moment in his room lifting weights, obsessed with strength from the earliest age. On the wall hung a skull, a stark reminder of his isolation. Orphaned and without anyone to rely on, he realized early that he had to train to survive. Day after day, he pressed the barbell upward, slowly but surely growing stronger. At one point, Kai set the weights across his chest, arms trembling as he rested. Back then, he was only a C+ rank hunter. Hunters, the new respected profession of that era, risked their lives to fight monsters and explore dungeons born of the abyss. In doing so, they safeguarded humanity while also earning wealth. Monster cores and dungeon artifacts fetched enormous prices, drawing countless seekers of money and glory. With nothing left to lose, Kai too became a hunter. Beside him, Bill sat in a chair, calling out for Kai to slow down. Wiping away sweat, Kai looked over as Bill shook his head. Entering a dungeon filled with B-rank monsters, he warned, was reckless. Even now, they struggled to handle C-rank dungeons, and many hunters died there as well. Bill leaned to the side and added that although magic, martial arts, and artifacts from dungeons were all valuable, they still didn't make humans strong enough. Kai frowned, clearly troubled. Bill buried his head in his hands, doubting that one could grow stronger by recklessly diving into harder dungeons. He asked Kai if he even cared about his own life, or if he at least had a girlfriend waiting for him. Kai exhaled and admitted that he had broken up with her. Bill expressed sympathy and asked why, since he thought Kai was a genuinely good person. Stretching his arms, Kai explained that he had told her he couldn't go on dates because of training. Eventually, she sent him off to fight a monster instead. He added that there had been no fights, no bad blood, just a quiet, mutual parting. Bill was left speechless. He slapped his forehead, groaning that Kai was absolutely hopeless. Then, suddenly, an explosion erupted. The monster advanced toward the protagonist, just as his comrades had warned him. Its jaws stretched open, unleashing a deafening roar. Kai, however, remained calm and slipped into a fighting stance. With a sudden surge of power, he drove his fist into the monster's chest, forcing it to tense and recoil. As Kai continued pummeling the beast, the other hunters exchanged words. They remarked on how martial artists often struggled compared to mages. While martial artists were hardy and made for reliable frontline fighters, Their damage output could never match the destructive power of spellcasters. Kai delivered a sharp blow to the monster's chin. One hunter questioned why he had ever chosen the path of a fist fighter, and another explained that Kai had obtained a martial arts scroll while farming, though most dismissed it as useless since nearly everyone sought only magical power. Kai chose to study it. When the monster finally fell, Kai looked at its lifeless form without regret. He cared little for others' opinions. The decision to pursue martial arts was his own, and he had never once wished to abandon it. Each night, he trained relentlessly. Martial arts might not have been as dazzling or convenient as magic, but their essence lay in effort and discipline. The more he trained, the stronger he became. That was a path that suited him perfectly. Kai raised his leg sharply above his head, then lunged forward with precision. No regrets burdened him, only the constant drive to achieve more. At 3 a.m., he glanced tiredly at the clock, realizing his training was still not enough. Sitting in the corner of his room, he reflected on his progress. Through sheer determination, he had climbed to C+ rank, yet others had surpassed him. If he wanted to grow stronger, he would have to push himself harder, longer, and without pause. Leaning back, Kai closed his eyes, appearing to drift into sleep. Yet even in his dreams, he continued to train. A sudden voice broke the silence. Kai moved instinctively, spreading his arms and striking with his knee. The unseen figure questioned whether he was truly awake even in sleep. Kai dismissed the thought, but admitted it made sense after all. Many considered this kind of training to be spiritual in nature. A bright light spilled across half his face. Shielding his eyes, Kai turned toward it and asked who was there. A humanoid figure with long hair stepped forward, addressing him respectfully as Mr. Kai. His pupils narrowed when the being revealed itself as a constellation, specifically the constellation of the Abyss. The figure, with bandaged eyes, introduced herself as Themis, the virtuous goddess of scales. She smiled softly, acknowledging his shock, before urging that they speak directly since time was short. Kai stared blankly as she admitted her true intention. She wished to make a deal with him. Turning aside, Themis explained that she was used to people bombarding her with questions upon meeting a constellation. To her surprise, Kai agreed immediately. She blinked in disbelief, asking if he was certain, and Kai repeated with confusion yet conviction, he agreed. When she approached, questioning his lack of hesitation, he simply asked whether this deal would grant him power. After a pause, Themis confirmed it. That alone was enough. Kai smiled sincerely, satisfied with her answer. The surroundings brightened suddenly, and Kai asked why she had chosen him of all people. Countless hunters boasted higher ranks and greater fame, so why him? Themis raised her palm, gathering the light, and reminded him of her name. She declared herself the virtuous goddess of scales, blessed with the ability to see the future. The glow in her hand dimmed before bursting outward, unveiling a grim vision. Before Kai's eyes, she revealed the monsters that would bring about Earth's apocalypse in the coming years. She warned that when evil constellations, such as Org, descended upon the world, they would devour both people and machines. On that day, humanity would realize the dungeons and monsters they currently fought were nothing more than child's play. A glowing red planet appeared beneath Kai's feet as Themis spoke with gravity. He was the key to preventing this catastrophic future. Kai looked up, stunned. Rising gracefully before him, Themis assured him that she would make him stronger. The protagonist's eyes and mouth widened in shock when she revealed that long, grueling, and inhumane training awaited him. The virtuous goddess of scales smiled nervously, fear flickering across her face. Soon, cold sweat ran down her skin, for she had never imagined anyone would willingly agree to such a contract. Dee spread her arms and explained that through this harsh training, Kai would eventually be able to become her avatar. She pressed her fingers together against her palms, her expression uncertain. Kai looked at her in awe, though her lips trembled as she extended her hand. Offering such a deal to a hunter was unheard of, completely unfair and illogical. The man complained about the blinding flash that accompanied the formation of a contract with a constellation, noting how unbearably difficult it was to become an avatar. Shielding his eyes with his hand, he listened as the goddess explained his soul would be permanently bound to the constellation, confined by its eternal limitations. Holding a glowing sphere in her hand, the deity urged him to look. The man reluctantly opened his eyes. The constellation smiled warmly and placed the sphere in his grasp, assuring him of the strength and magic it would grant. With the contract sealed, his rank immediately rose, and the goddess once again offered him the chance to become her avatar. But she warned that a single person could have multiple constellation candidates, and they were notoriously impatient, often fighting amongst themselves to claim an avatar. Themis and Kai exchanged a long silence, both fully aware of this well-known fact among hunters. At last, the protagonist brightened and asked what kind of training awaited him. Since he was not considered an exceptional hunter, no other constellations had fought for him. Behind the goddess, a colossal set of scales appeared as she explained that she had prepared a training ground within the abyss, reminding him that time flowed differently there than on Earth. Kai's face froze when Themis revealed that he would be forced to train alone for dozens, even hundreds, of years. She added, with a heavy pause, that even if he gave up midway, he would not be able to return. Nervous, Kai laughed awkwardly, comparing it to the hyperbolic time chamber from Dragon Ball. Trembling, he begged her to forget he had even asked. When she failed to understand the reference, Kai clenched his fist, assuring himself that this was the right path. After all, hunters grew stronger through contracts with constellations. Still, he believed it unfair to become stronger so easily, but he was wrong. Smiling faintly, he reasoned that if other avatars endured this, then so would he. Yet, in truth, they had grown powerful before ever signing their contracts. The goddess spread her hands, admitting she understood how heavy this decision was. She confessed it was far too much to ask of a mortal. Kai, however, lifted his head and accepted without hesitation, even though Themis had intended to give him a week to consider. Startled, the goddess pressed him to reconsider, asking if he was truly certain. But Kai, his gaze unwavering, explained that he was not deeply attached to this world. He only asked for permission to leave behind a letter. He wasn't making this choice out of deep thought, but rather out of a desire to grow stronger. And, as an added bonus, the world would be saved in the process. The constellation lowered her arms and fell silent until Kai gently called her name. Dee dabbed her tears with a handkerchief, confessing she had feared the rumors that mortals on Earth were greedy and selfish. Yet she was relieved that, at least this time, her prophecy had been proven true. Kai closed himself off from her radiant presence, realizing too late that the goddess had misjudged before. Then, a portal burst open above them, shards of light scattering across the sky. He stared in shock as Themis instructed him to simply focus on the letter, promising to deliver it exactly where he wished. Standing before the portal, Kai extended his hand toward its swirling light. His fingers began to sink into the pull of its current, and soon his entire body was drawn inside. He vanished into the turbulent streams within the portal, leaving behind only a faint crack in the sky. The protagonist's room was empty. A letter appeared beside his barbell, bearing in its corner an address intended for everyone. Lightning tore through the sky, and soon after, a hurricane materialized. From within that violent whirlwind, Kai emerged, clearing his throat. He opened one eye, immediately sensing that the concentration of magic here was on an entirely different level. He gazed at the floating islands of the abyss, struck by how much they resembled a dungeon. Scientists on Earth had long speculated that dungeons were fragments torn from the abyss itself. Looking up at the star-filled sky, the protagonist realized there was nothing else here. To his surprise, this was to be his training ground. Glancing down at his fists, he resolved to begin. Kai stretched out his arms, moving through the motions of practice, his voice echoing as he made sharp sounds with each movement. Meanwhile, Themis was surrounded by her winged subordinates. She declared with certainty that this time she had successfully disrupted the vision before it could progress too far. The girls hesitated, unsure of how to respond. They believed, however, that the protagonist was an excellent candidate to become an avatar. The goddess of scales smiled faintly, remarking that it was possible if he pushed himself hard enough. Still, she admitted her foresight was limited. Though she could glimpse fragments of the future, the rest was no more than conjecture. In truth, Themis had seen Kai training in the abyss. She also knew he would one day suppress the invasion of evil constellations. Raising two fingers, the goddess decided that forging such a powerful man into her sworn avatar was the perfect plan, no matter how much time it might take. With this thought, she departed. Yet her confidence only deepened her subordinates' unease, for they sensed a troubling omen. All Themis could do now was wait for Kai to begin his training. Far in the distance behind the protagonist, another hurricane began to form. The goddess believed she had prepared everything. The storm grew, and one constellation was certain the boy had been given diversions should boredom strike, and most importantly, a safe haven. Kai, however, was startled to see the tornado. He turned toward the looming natural disaster, recognizing its danger. To the goddess, this was the least she could do for him. Looking up at the whirlwind, the protagonist assumed it must be a test. Raising his fists, he accepted that this was true strength could only be gained by facing danger. If the goddess had prepared this ordeal, then its meaning was undeniable. The whirlwind slammed into the ground. Kai let out a cry. Could this truly be the goddess's trial? Closing his eyes, he felt as though his body was being torn apart. Opening them slightly, he resolved to endure. The storm seized him, lifting him into the air. Lost within the tornado's fury, he shouted a quote he had once heard, "Only through pain and hardship could one grow stronger, for this was the will of the gods." Lightning ripped through the hurricane. Something cracked. Shards rained down as light spilled from behind them. A radiant pillar burst forth, dispelling the illusion magic that had cloaked the domain of the virtuous Liber goddess. This enchantment had been a basic safeguard, but now it was stripped away. The pillar's spire reached skyward before the magical storm surged once more, raging uncontrollably. Even the goddess herself was bewildered, unable to foresee such an outcome. Her subordinates exchanged anxious glances as she wondered why the protagonist had not yet entered. Themis grew troubled, convinced she should have sensed his presence the moment he stepped into the training citadel. Yet still, there was no sign of him. Leaning forward, she murmured that she had left him only 10 meters from the tower. He need only walk a little farther to find it. Then she mused that perhaps earthlings were incapable of acting on their own. Her gaze shifted to the dumbbells and sports nutrition she had prepared for Kai, along with everything necessary for training. She had even secured first-class equipment to ensure he could practice safely and effectively. Beyond that, she had provided consoles and, for some reason, even a cat toy so the protagonist would have amusement during his downtime. As her winged spearmen patrolled the citadel, Themis considered it the least she could offer. For a hunter who had accepted such perilous terms, she could at least create a comfortable environment where he could focus entirely on his training. The angel, with a glowing halo above his head, informed the lady that he had inspected the perimeter of the citadel but had not found the person she spoke of. The goddess's subordinate stood silently by, unable to believe Ray's words, certain that she had sent Kai there. The angel leaned forward, hesitating for a moment, then glanced toward the spire. He assumed the man had been hurled back by the magical storm of the abyss. Ray pressed a hand to his ear, listening carefully to the mistress's request to find Kai, which he immediately accepted. When the goddess shouted in frustration, demanding the hunter's return, he closed his eyes against her voice. Day clenched her fists and declared they could not simply leave the protagonist to wander within the abyss, that he needed to be saved. The angel's expression turned pitiful as he looked aside and reluctantly accepted the order. Ray then turned toward the countless floating islands, vowing to find Kai at any cost. The skies resembled distant nebulae scattered across an endless void. The abyss stretched vast and empty, with clusters of bright stars scattered through it, as if even the constellations themselves could only tame part of this world. Somewhere in this dark blue expanse, they would have to find the man carried away by the magical storm. Ray flew steadily toward a faint light, gripping his spear firmly before him. The goddess stood in deep thought, aware that the angel's task was nearly impossible. The hurricane had erupted once again, and Kai's body was caught within its raging currents of mana powerful enough to tear him apart. The young man shut his eyes and held his breath, feeling as though he were drowning beneath a vast sea he had never known. At last, he inhaled deeply, then exhaled. Power flooded into his body, and a system notification appeared. A high concentration of magical energy was circulating through his breathing. The divine space art had absorbed this power, converting it into Kai and strengthening his body. Even his bones and muscles were enhanced, confirmed by the system itself. Drifting along the torrent, the protagonist reflected that these were trials. Another system notification informed him that his Danshin and Kai potential had increased. Compared to the storm, his figure seemed impossibly small, yet he pressed onward. As he disappeared into its center, he realized as expected that becoming the avatar of a constellation would never be simple. A stream of mana pierced the sky, crashing violently into the ground. Kai lay dazed in the crater it left, but eventually forced himself to stand. He hoped this ordeal was over, that his first training was a success. Lifting his head, he saw that ahead lay the place where the next trial would begin. The ground was barren stone, an unclaimed fragment of the abyss untouched by any constellation. Suddenly, a massive serpent erupted from beneath the earth, then burrowed back down. Kai stared in awe, realizing how enormous the beast was compared to him. Still, he reminded himself that his training required victory. The monster's stone head reminded him of Onyx from Pokemon, though he quickly realized this creature was of an entirely different rank. He wondered if the goddess had overestimated him, for he was barely a C-rank hunter. Kai clenched his fists, dismissing his doubts, and reminded himself that Themis surely had a plan for him. He charged forward, declaring that if he had time, he might as well fight. With all his might, he swung and struck the serpent's scales, but was stunned when the creature did not even react. Breathing hard, he studied its massive armored body and admitted to himself that he could not even scratch it. The monster yawned, unimpressed. Kai scowled, then kept attacking, determined to train until he could shatter the serpent into rubble. Elsewhere, someone held a book of divine space art, announcing they had obtained it as a bonus during an auction, and asked if anyone wished to learn it. Another hunter dismissed the offer, pointing out it was merely a D-rank skill. Meanwhile, Kai wrapped his fists with bandages as the group continued discussing. They remarked that martial cultivation was not only difficult but also unpopular, since few had the patience to master it. In the end, the owner, seeing no interest, decided to sell the skill outright. The protagonist looked up and heard laughter, followed by a statement so unbelievable that no ordinary person would have accepted it. He turned to the owner and said he wanted to try. The owner, slightly surprised, asked if he was interested in learning martial arts. Kai took the book after replying that he had always enjoyed reading. Muram, another hunter nearby, remarked that Kai had unusual tastes for his age, but warned him not to rely solely on this skill. As Kai stared at the cover, the hunter added that everyone knew cultivating Kai required an incredible amount of time. If Kai thought this skill alone would make him stronger, he should consider learning something else. Mages used Mon, their life force, to cast spells, while martial artists relied on Kai, an essential part of their strength. Training was notoriously slow, especially when it came to the divine space art, which naturally made it unpopular. Cultivating Kai required years of effort, and the damage output varied depending on the amount of energy gathered. Still, Kai opened the book and began to read, different from most. He had many chances to learn other martial arts, yet he smiled, genuinely liking this teaching. The boy struck Onyx with his left fist, then with his right, recalling that the divine space art had no unique method of cultivating Kai. His hands began to smoke. He unleashed the space fist skill, then stepped forward with moonwalk, and finally launched a straight kick called the Milky Kick. Lightning wrapped around his feet, every movement infused with Kai before returning to his body. He positioned his leg, filled with power, at his center in the Danon. With each repeated strike and kick, an almost insignificant amount of Kai accumulated within him. Kai closed his eyes. He knew that, if repeated endlessly, this training could turn him into a master of martial arts. His eyes tightened shut, then snapped open. Extending his palm, he realized that, in theory, it sounded simple, but in practice, few could endure it. He bent his hem, clenched his fist, and swung with all his strength. Though he thought himself talentless, he was mistaken. His fist crashed against the monster's armor, proving that he possessed a rare talent, the ability to endure fatigue and persevere without end. The snake turned, sensing the pressure. It saw a small man standing there. This time, the protagonist's punch landed with far more force than before. It was persistence alone that allowed him to endure, as though he had spent 100 years repeating the same motions. The monster fell unconscious, and the system congratulated Kai for learning the B+ rank skill, Inner Destruction Fist Technique. Kai stared in disbelief as the system further informed him that he had reached a new level in the divine space art, the level of an advanced martial artist. Onyx shattered into fragments and exploded, leaving behind a cloud of dust. The protagonist looked at the rising debris, hardly able to believe that he had become a B-rank hunter. Climbing onto a boulder, Kai sighed. He told himself he had no talent, but his thoughts drifted to Tom, a hunter from China who had managed to reach a rank. Surrounded constantly by paparazzi, Tom was the only martial artist to have ever achieved that level. Kai closed his eyes and admitted he had become a martial arts expert, which put him around the level of a 6-circle mage. During a press event, a reporter had asked Tom if he aimed for a higher rank. Without hesitation, Tom clenched his fist and declared that his goal was to become the first S-rank martial artist. Remembering this, Kai felt disheartened, thinking it would take him 1,000 years to reach Tom's level. Just then, he heard a sound. Looking down at his feet, he saw Onyx battered and miserable, whining pitifully. Kai placed his hands on his hips and asked why the monster looked at him that way. After all, it had been a fair fight. But Onyx whined again. It wasn't ignoring him out of pride. The serpent had simply endured decades of punishment as Kai cultivated his strength, and the damage had taken its toll. The snake gazed at him with weary eyes, and Kai's lips trembled. Seeing its exhausted state, he raised his hands and decided to let it go, remembering that he had forced it to be his training partner when it had only been minding its own business. As he stood lost in thought, Onyx slowly approached. Kai felt a little disoriented, unsure of where to go next in this vast training ground where the path was his to choose. Suddenly, the stone serpent lifted Kai onto its head. The protagonist sat comfortably, almost casually, and thanked the monster for letting him ride. He added that walking through the abyss would have been unbearably boring. Shading his eyes with his hand, the boy gazed ahead. A magical storm loomed in the distance, its sound unmistakable one he had first heard 100 years ago when he fell into the abyss. He rose to his feet, surprised to witness it again. Onyx trembled with fear, but Kai only turned halfway toward the tornado, assuming it was a gift from the goddess meant to guide him to the second trial. The serpent croaked in protest, its guttural cry carrying a warning that Kai would die if he entered. Compared to the massive whirlwind, the serpent seemed small and powerless, unwilling to advance. Kai dropped to all fours, repeating his command to move forward, unaware that even the mightiest of monsters could perish inside a magical storm. The serpent cried out and lifted its head as the tornado seized them, carrying the stone beast into the air like a helpless worm. It had no choice but to obey. The whirlwind roared beneath the burning orange sky, tearing past and leaving Onyx behind. Dizzy and shaken, the serpent could not rise, but Kai was thrilled with this new way of traversing the abyss. Looking at his hands, the boy reflected aloud that reaching the advanced level had allowed him to realize just how extraordinary a magical storm was. Onyx, however, was horrified. Kai felt as if he were inhaling the hurricane itself, mana flooding his body, filling him with strength, and washing away fatigue. It was an incredible training method, restoring him completely. Smiling at the serpent, he admitted that the constellations were truly remarkable to control such power. Of course, he was completely mistaken. In truth, the storm would have ripped him apart in an instant, had he not instinctively accepted it as a trial from the goddess and surrendered to its flow. Luck alone kept him alive. The protagonist then looked around for food, realizing he hadn't eaten in over 100 years, yet he wasn't hungry. Patting his stomach, he confessed that he still wanted to chew on something. Turning to the serpent, he was surprised when the creature opened its mouth to reveal a stone. Wagging its tail, it seemed to offer the boulder as food, as though it could be considered meat from its own body. Kai accepted the strange gift, staring at the rock in his hands. He assumed it was an act of revenge for being used as a training tool for a century. But when he noticed how happy the serpent looked, he smiled uncertainly and realized it bore no malice. Returning the stone, he thanked the creature and explained that, no matter how hungry he became, he would never eat his companion. The serpent lifted him up in delight, and Kai laughed, calling it cute. Hanging onto Onyx's head, he was startled when the system informed him that he had mastered all knowledge of the stone serpent. It congratulated him on gaining combat insight from the monster's movements. Stone serpent fist. Spreading his legs, Kai tested the technique, realizing it gave him the power to shatter the ground. His body bent with unnatural fluidity, moving as though he were floating. He struck the air, mimicking the serpent's motions, immediately experimenting with his newfound skill. By this time, he was already an advanced master. Clenching his fists, he felt the strength of the technique, but resolved not to abandon his divine space arts. Relaxing, he admitted that with each step forward, his understanding deepened. He looked forward eagerly to his next trial, imagining where it might take place. Soon, he stood before an endless ocean, its purple waves raging. He deduced that this trial would be underwater. Turning to Onyx, he ordered the serpent to stay behind, explaining that a stone body would surely drown. Then he dove. The water exploded in a spray as he plunged into the depths, where sea monsters awaited. A frown crossed his face. Something felt wrong. His body began to flounder just as the system reported that the poisonous water had entered his body, draining the Kai he had obtained from the divine space arts. Fish-like creatures rushed toward him, and the system warned that if all his Kai was depleted, his life would be in peril. One of the creatures bit Kai on the arm, and the system notified him that his body was gradually adapting to the poison. The protagonist exhaled, releasing a stream of air from his mouth, and immediately felt his resistance to the venom strengthen. A sudden flash flickered beneath the water's surface. Meanwhile, the snake lay silently on the shore, waiting. Kai watched as ripples spread across the pond. He flinched in surprise when something suddenly burst out from the depths. It was the protagonist himself, landing firmly on dry land. Glancing back, still under the lingering impression of the abyssal ocean, the boy wondered if he should retrieve the shining object resting at the bottom. Kai stood before the pond, admitting to himself that he did not know how to swim across such an ocean. Still, he reasoned that if this was a trial from the heavens, there had to be a way forward. Yet once again, he was mistaken. Adopting a thoughtful pose, he began weighing his options. Turning to Onyx, the protagonist realized he had no choice. He struck with his fist, then followed with a kick. Kai steadied himself and concluded that only by channeling the divine space art could he gather enough Kai to swim across the poisonous sea. It was indeed the correct path, though one that would demand an immense amount of time. Sighing, the young man left another mark upon the stone. A wave of melancholy swept over him. He had been training for far too long. Gazing at the massive boulder covered in countless carvings, He admitted that while he was grateful for his growing strength, he resented the endless years it required. After all, he had been here for 2 centuries. The snake slithered closer, unsettling Kai despite his awareness that time flowed differently in this place. He looked at Onyx and asked if the creature enjoyed eating stones. As he walked along the shore, he confessed that he too longed to eat something. Mana kept him from feeling hunger, yet without food, his life felt strangely hollow. With a trace of sadness, he and his companion watched the sunset, remembering that he had spoken similar words 200 years before. Suddenly, a creature emerged from the toxic waters, a monster of the poisonous ocean. Its tongue flickered in the air. The protagonist leaned closer, considering that by definition it could be called a fish, since it dwelled in the sea. His eyes darkened with a calculating gleam. If he prepared it correctly, perhaps it could be eaten. Onyx recoiled, unsettled by his master's sudden intensity. Kai only smiled. Smoke rose from the monster's corpse as he stood over it, realizing that to eat properly, the creature would first need to be cooked. He approached the mountain of stones and struck it. Shards scattered into the air. Smiling faintly, Kai noticed that a crude stone kitchen knife had formed upon the rock. He decided it was a good first attempt. Together, he and Onyx fixed their eyes on the monster. The snake lifted its head nervously as its master cursed the stone blade had melted away. Kai stared at the ruined knife, wondering how he was supposed to cook without it. Onyx let out a sharp cry when the protagonist muttered that perhaps the meat should be eaten raw, like sashimi. Puffing out his cheeks, the serpent presented him with a shining stone. Kai blinked in surprise before realizing what his companion meant. In his hands was adamantium, a rare treasure, highly prized among rock-type beasts. When he discovered that the metal did not corrode in contact with the monster's fluids, Kai decided to fashion it into a cutting board. A small smile touched his lips. Training in the abyss, he thought, would allow him to craft proper cooking tools. He remembered Bill's words that every person should have hobbies, and for the first time, those words made sense. He felt a quiet satisfaction in the act of leisure, imagining a future where he might become a chef. With the right tools and practice, his meals could serve not only as entertainment, but as an aid to his cultivation. Lifting a piece of the monster's flesh, Kai admitted this was all he could manage for now. He bit into it while Onyx looked on in horror. Kai had never been particular about food. Even back on Earth, he had adhered to a strict diet, answering his co-workers' questions about meals by telling them that his starter, main course, and dessert were all variations of chicken breast. To him, food had always been nothing more than fuel. But this time, green smoke seeped from his mouth. He refused to believe it was simply a matter of taste. His eyes flashed, and he collapsed to his knees, overcome by nausea. Onyx panicked as the system warned that he had ingested poison. On all fours, Kai exhaled thick smoke, while the system confirmed that the deadly venom was being purged through the divine space art. At last, Kai looked down at the meat again, as the system notified him that his Kai had slightly increased. He brought the stack closer and noticed that although his tongue felt slightly numb, the meat was still edible. To his surprise, the food even increased his Kai. The monster fish released green smoke into the air poison. Yet poison itself was also a form of energy, one that could be converted into Kai. Before the poison could take hold, Kai clenched his fingers and raised his head with confidence. The stone serpent grew fearful once more when its master decided to begin a hunt, declaring that he would devour every monster. Centuries passed. The protagonist finally emerged from the water, walking to the shore with 2 fish in hand. Only their skeletons remained behind. During this long period, Kai's mind and body had changed. Indifferently, he chewed the meat, but the system warned him that a deadly poison was spreading through his body. He tore off another piece, listening as the system continued. It informed him that the poison had been successfully neutralized through the power of Kai, and that his body now possessed maximum resistance to toxins. Placing a hand on his hip, he received a notification. Resistance to countless poisons had been acquired. along with the rank skill, perfect immunity to poison. Kai raised his palm as the system confirmed that toxins could no longer affect him, and furthermore, he could now release and wield poison from his Danyan. Closing his eyes, he received another warning: the level of his divine space art had risen. When he opened his eyes, his skill had reached the expert level. Stars glimmered in the sky above. Kai noticed that the goddess had not yet called him, and silently hoped all was well with the world below. The stone was now covered in countless notches. Reflecting aloud, the protagonist stated that he had attained full resistance to poison and reached an expert level, something he could never have dreamed of achieving back on Earth, where by now he should already have become a rank hunter. He lay down beside the stone, remembering that on Earth he would have been considered a strategic weapon, subject to the control of the state. Yet even then, it would not have been enough to save the planet from disaster. Rising to his feet, he resolved that it was time to move forward to the next stage of his training. Stroking Onyx, he told the serpent that they would part ways here, for he needed to journey into a far more dangerous place to grow stronger still. The snake opened his eyes, and Kai added that since Onyx was a stone type, he might not be able to follow him into the water. The protagonist waved to his companion, said his farewell, and asked him to return home. Then he dove into the depths. With his complete immunity to poisons, the ocean no longer posed any threat to him. Sea monsters still lurked in the water, but at the sight of Kai they scattered in terror, powerless to resist. Peering downward, he thought he had finally found it. Before him glowed a shining point, the source of magical power he had glimpsed on his first day. Now, at last, he could examine it up close. Swimming nearer, he realized it was a portal leading to the next stage of his training. Immersed in its light, he wondered what awaited him. Above, it was bright. Below, it was shadowed. Eager anticipation welled up inside him. Landing on one knee, he was immediately met with a series of system messages. The divine space art had foreseen battle. All of his Kai gates had been automatically activated. Kai now overflowed through his body, and his defenses had been raised to resist incoming attacks. The protagonist grew solemn. At the expert level, one's body automatically prepared for combat whenever hostility was sensed. 3 monsters turned their gaze toward Kai, followed by 2 more. Even those without martial training would have sensed the danger of this place. A crimson moon hung in the sky, and an overwhelming bloodlust, typical only of high-level dungeons, pressed down on him. Above, a pink star ignited the sign of a godlike being. Such beings were known as constellations, and their attributes defined the very laws of their territory. The tallest monster, resembling a demon, laughed. Opening his mouth, he asked Kai what race he belonged to. Kai frowned and answered firmly he was human. The constellation leaned closer, chuckling, and remarked that it must be his first time here. His stomach split open, and he began to speak further. Kai, surprisingly, felt a touch of gratitude as the monster explained. Then, reaching into his own stomach, the creature pulled out a massive sword. He declared that newcomers must be cut down, so they would understand that this land was ruled by the Lord of Blood and Battles. Carl the Constellation took the weapon in his hand. The man opposite him assumed a fighting stance, recalling Carl's title. The monster swung, and the protagonist admitted that this training ground carried a violent theme. Carl struck. Kai raised his fist, streams of purple energy glowing around his hand. The system reported that he had formed a Kai fist, concentrating his power. The man struck the sword, and to the monster's surprise, its weapon crumbled. The protagonist leapt into the air, delivering a blow to the enemy's face. Carl fell. The demon gaped as Kai called for them to attack. He pointed at them and declared that he had come to take a test. The monsters laughed, mocking him, for none had ever heard of such a test. One of them stuck out its purple tongue and jeered, suggesting Kai wanted them to test him in order to draw their master's attention. They admitted, however, that the man before them was impressive. The demon smiled, deciding he wasn't so weak after all. and that it made sense for him to seek the recognition of the Lord of Blood and Battles. They attacked as a group, intent on killing Kai. Their excitement mounting. It had been a long time since they had fought with such anticipation. The protagonist turned halfway, facing the enemies who sought to tear him apart. He struck them from both sides at once. A blue demon took a direct hit to the jaw, launching into the air along with the first wave of enemies. The rest pressed forward, trying to surround him and force him to stop using his strange techniques. Kai lifted his leg and unleashed a radiant strike, scattering his foes. Clicking his tongue, he bent his knee and surveyed the endless tide of monsters. The place was far too open. He did not want to fight while surrounded. The demons and their hounds soon realized that the man before them was stronger than he appeared. The beasts bared their teeth, and the monster declared that since Kai was still a man, his purpose was to serve as food for their animals. Kai frowned, for these creatures did not resemble dogs at all. The hounds lunged, dissatisfied with their numbers. Kai shifted into a fighting stance and struck one of them, channeling his strength through the attribute of the territory under the power of this constellation. The second law of nature demanded that a person must always be ready to defend himself. A beast clamped its jaws onto his shoulder, but here, under Karl's dominion, only one rule existed: all avatars must fight endlessly. Kai casually struck the demon aside and began looking for an advantageous position. His attention shifted to a nearby building. He kicked the door open, apologizing to the unknown owner for borrowing the house for a short time. Inside, a bearded demon smiled and greeted him warmly, noting his fortunate timing since an excellent soup had just finished cooking. Kai found himself in a restaurant furnished with tables and chairs, surprised that such places existed even here. The owner explained that to fight well, one must also eat well. Scratching the back of his head, Kai apologized for the broken door and asked for food, admitting he hadn't eaten anything proper in a long while. The demon smiled slyly and invited him to taste the meal. He poured an entire vat over Kai, revealing it to be a poisonous steam stew. A green cloud engulfed Kai's head as the owner mockingly asked if he found it delicious. The demon swayed in disbelief when Kai replied that he did. The protagonist inhaled the smoke, enveloped in the dense cloud. Thanks to his perfect immunity to poison, no toxin could harm him. Instead, he learned to control the venom. Smiling, Kai absorbed the poisonous energy into his danjian, converting it into Kai, and remarked that it was quite a fine dish. The demon was shocked, unable to comprehend what kind of being stood before him. Suddenly, monsters burst into the restaurant, brandishing weapons and baring their fangs as they shouted their intent to kill him. Kai only smiled with confidence. The shadow of the establishment's owner fell across him, only for Kai's knee to smash into his face, which he deemed a worthy tip. A table toppled in front of the demons as Kai used it to barricade himself, inviting the enemies to approach. Now the monsters grew tense, uncertain of how to deal with this man. The man holding the chair above his head shouted that he could fight forever. The protagonist noticed the chair raised high. This was his moment, his rush hour. With precise timing, he blocked the demon's strike using the legs of the stool. Kai quickly seized the enemy's sword. He looked forward, and when the system reported that he had acquired the B+ ranked Jai skill for wielding the chair as a weapon, he exclaimed with satisfaction that he knew it. The protagonist then struck the monster with a confident smile and declared that the highest level of understanding could only be reached in life and death situations. At last, he understood why the goddess had placed such a trial before him. Meanwhile, the virtuous goddess of Libra was deeply troubled about Kain Ray, of whom there was still no word. An angel drifted aimlessly through the abyss, unable to comprehend how he was supposed to locate the one person in this desolate place. Around them, demons lay collapsed on the ground, foaming at the mouth. The protagonist lowered his chair, exhaled, and asked aloud how many more times he would have to endure this. His eyes fell on the cauldron from which the strange brew had been poured over him. As he approached, his heightened martial perception alerted him to a supernatural presence radiating from the vessel. Looking inside, he saw the remnants of the soup spilling from the cauldron. Kai immediately sensed something powerful and unusual within it. Before he could examine further, a demon grabbed his ankle. Forced to turn, Kai heard the monster roar that he had no idea what he was meddling with. The protagonist picked up the cauldron, surprised that its owner had not yet perished. The demon, outraged, declared that the Lord of Blood and Battle did not permit trivial deaths to interrupt the fighting, and that here his power would endlessly revive his servants. Suddenly, the demon broke down, weeping and begging for mercy. It explained that it had endured horrors to obtain this adamantite cauldron. Kai silenced it with a sharp kick to the head, accusing the creature of having stolen the cauldron by preying on others. He pressed his foot against the demon's nose, making it scream, then leaned closer and coldly stated that in this world, the victor takes everything. Outside, more demons lay defeated. The protagonist decided that both the adamantite cauldron and the restaurant Erie now belonged to him. Picking up a piece of the ruined wall, he recalled an old martial arts tale of a retired fighter who had once owned a simple tavern. Inspired, Kai began repairing the structure. What had started as nothing more than finding a suitable battleground had unexpectedly turned into acquiring a business. Soon after, he stepped outside wearing a pink apron and proudly announced that this place would henceforth be known as Kiri Kiri. The former owner raised his head from the ground in protest, but Kai only smiled. If the demon wanted his property back, he would have to fight for it after all. That was the law of this world. Entering the kitchen, Kai noticed it was kept remarkably clean. He smirked, recalling Bill's advice on hobbies and the time he had eaten a monster raw. Resting his hand on the table, Kai observed that he now had ingredients, dishes, and a place everything he needed. He picked up an unfamiliar cut of meat that looked both appetizing and filling, then took a bite. Almost instantly, he received a system warning that he had ingested poison. Scowling, he reached for a strange fruit resembling an avocado, only to curse when the same message appeared. The restaurant stores were full of dangerous spiky mushrooms, exotic leaves, twisted roots, yet each attempt ended with another poison notification. Frustrated, the protagonist held his head in his hands, unable to grasp why an entire restaurant's supplies were so toxic. Then realization struck. This was the food of demons. He glanced at the table full of ingredients and decided it did not matter. His poison immunity would protect him, and he could even turn this into strength. A new idea dawned on him. Instead of consuming the ingredients raw, he would throw everything into the cauldron, using poison itself as a vital component in his cooking. Since it had no effect on him, it was the perfect solution, a stroke of twisted genius. Kai spent his days battling monsters at the entrance of the restaurant, honing his strength. At night, he experimented with new dishes, tasting his creations in the quiet hours. Thus, his life within the diner continued for several hundred years. One day, while sweeping the floor, he noticed the door slam open. The demons had arrived. The enraged former owner stormed in, shouting for Kai to come outside. He had returned. Clutching a knife and a cleaver, the man demanded the return of his restaurant, explaining that he had joined the other demons simply out of boredom. Kai placed his hands on his hips, almost amused. He admitted that he respected their determination, but in the next instant, he struck them down with his fists, tossing them aside as though they were nothing. "This is a pub now," he declared, "not some cheap restaurant." The demon chef, his face swollen and bruised, could not comprehend how his knife had failed to even graze Kai. With no further patience, Kai hurled the intruders out of his pub, shouting after them to leave before he truly lost his temper. The system congratulated him. His body glowed faintly with a golden light as the voice explained that, after countless battles, he had awakened a rank skill, harmony of body and mind. With it, his divine space arts became more fluid and natural. Streams of power flowed from him in all directions, evidence that his inner energy now circulated at an accelerated rate. His body moved in perfect alignment with his intent. His thoughts and actions were one. His speed and efficiency surpassed anything he had ever achieved before, all thanks to this new skill. Kai tested his movements, his hands tracing arcs so swift they were nearly impossible to follow. Every martial artist longed for such mastery, yet the skill was notoriously difficult to obtain. Magic skill books, in comparison, were far more accessible. Scrolls with spells like Ice Arrow often appeared in auctions, coveted by hunters who dreamed of obtaining such power. Many crouched in dungeons, praying they might stumble upon the legendary scroll of harmony of body and mind. Others resigned themselves to gambling, buying lottery tickets on the advice of friends. Kai clenched his fists and admitted to himself that he did not know why the skill had chosen him. All he knew was that it had been earned through relentless battles, each one fought to the brink of death. More demons surged into the pub, eager to challenge him, but Kai welcomed the fight. He thought with some amusement that if he ever returned to the martial world, other fighters would lose their minds at the sight of his skill. High above, a dark figure drifted through the sky, pleased by the endless conflict below.